Coming up, Brexit. Donald Trump's re-election is already having a massive impact all over the world, and post-Brexit Britain faces a moment of reckoning when Napoleon Bona-spur's America First philosophy is implemented by way of his trade tariffs and foreign policy. And within the UK, the Brexit tide had already turned just weeks after that fateful advisory referendum back in 2016, but now the public mood has shifted even further, with a clear majority now wanting European freedom of movement back, now that they've seen Brexit do the exact opposite of what it said on the tin by increasing immigration into the UK. Eight years after the referendum, Brexit remains a festering, pustulous wound in UK society. Far from delivering the independence and prosperity that those siren voices in the Leave EU movement promised, it's instead become a dead albatross around Britain's neck, dragging the economy down, isolating us internationally and leaving us vulnerable in an increasingly hostile world. With Donald Trump's return to the White House and his America First doctrine back in play, the case for re-evaluating post-Brexit Britain's place in the world is now a matter of critical necessity. Recent polls from just last month reveal a seismic shift in attitudes towards Brexit. For some time now, a majority of Britons have regretted leaving the EU, and support for rejoining has grown steadily over the past 2 years. Even among those who voted leave in 2016, there's a growing acknowledgement of the damage it's done. Notably, 54% of Leave voters are now willing to accept free movement in exchange for access to the single market. And in the Labour strongholds, the so-called Red Wall, voters are in favour of a return to freedom of movement by a ratio of more than 2-1, which makes Labour's Make Brexit Work mantra look incredibly out of touch with the rapidly changing public mood. Across the political spectrum, the call for closer ties with Europe is gaining traction, with 68% of voters overall supporting a return to free movement and single market access, against only 18% opposed. In order to rejoin the single market, UK voters are also in favour of accepting EU food and product safety laws, and even to accept the authority of the European Court of Justice by 41% to 40%. Apparently, the claim that it's sovereignty in it no longer holds true. The reasons for this shift are clear. The economic costs of Brexit are undeniable for all but the fully paid up, tinfoil hat-wearing members of the Brexit cult. British households face higher food prices. Small businesses are strangled by post-Brexit red tape, and industries from fishing to farming to manufacturing have been decimated. The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates a 15% drop in UK trade due to Brexit, while the Office for National Statistics is reporting losses to the British economy of £1 million per hour. The sunlit uplands of sovereignty have turned into a cesspit of isolation and decline. Fearful, I guess, of reigniting old divisions, Starmer and his Labour government aren't doing the obvious and issuing frank and direct calls to rejoin the EU. But cracks are beginning to show in their Make Brexit Work approach. Chancellor Rachel Reeves and Prime Minister Starmer have both recently visited Brussels, trying to repair relations with the EU. But let's be honest, that's a long way from what is desperately and urgently needed, a formal commitment from the UK government to begin the long process of preparing for an application for EU membership. Labour's manifesto promises to make Britain a leading nation in Europe again, but the actions so far have been timid, to say the very least. The EU is hostile, quite rightly, towards cherry-picking arrangements, and without fully fledged EU membership, it's hard to see how the UK could ever expect to rejoin the customs union and single market. Key issues such as youth mobility and fishing rights remain sticking points. If Labour is serious about putting country before party, it must start preparing the public for a much more fundamental reset of UK-EU relations. And that reset is given far greater urgency with Napoleon Bona-spur's re-election. His disdain for international alliances and plans to impose universal tariffs on imports, including from Britain, threaten to deepen the UK's economic woes. As a trading nation, Britain can't stand alone against the US trade war. The only viable counterweight to American economic dominance is the European Union. You know, our neighbours on our geographic doorstep, the only trading bloc with the clout to challenge Trump's protectionism. Trump's return also signals a shift in global security dynamics. With the US retreating from its role as the world's policeman, Europe, and by extension Britain, faces a more dangerous world. Russia's war in Ukraine and its increasing belligerence towards Moldova and the Baltic states, China's growing assertiveness in the China Sea area, and Middle Eastern instability as well. They all demand a unified response across nations. The EU has already demonstrated its ability to coordinate energy supplies and sanctions against Russia, showing the strength and power of collective action. Britain's absence from this partnership leaves us weaker and more vulnerable, while diminishing our reputation and our global influence. The arguments for rejoining the EU aren't rooted in nostalgia or idealism, but in hard-headed, future-focused pragmatism. The world of 2016, 8 years ago now, with its promises of global trade and specifically an advantageous trade deal with the USA, that world no longer exists. We now live in a world of barriers, tariffs and geopolitical competition. Britain's decision to leave the EU may have been debatable in some poor deluded people's minds in 2016, but it's indefensible by anyone in 2024. Rejoining the EU would restore access to the single market, revitalise struggling industries and provide a much-needed boost to the UK economy. It would also address the labour shortages that have crippled UK industrial sectors like agriculture, construction and healthcare. Beyond economics, rejoining would strengthen Britain's voice on the global stage. As part of the EU, we could shape policies on climate change, security and technology, a rule maker instead of a post-Brexit status as a rule taker. The political challenges for Starmer's government are significant. The EU would likely demand concessions such as joining the euro, at least in principle, or accepting tighter integration. Public opinion, though, becomes ever more supportive of closer ties and actually more enthusiastic about EU membership and increasingly accepting of the fact that any deal struck with the EU to rejoin will not be as good as the one we threw away back in 2016. The wonderful comedian Sean Locke, describing bad decisions he'd stupidly made that ended up costing him money, referred to it as twat tax and said that phrase made him feel better about his bad decisions. With Brexit, the UK will certainly have to pay twat tax as a result of that stupid decision back in 2016. Just how much twat tax we have to pay is down to negotiation. By engaging with European leaders, rebuilding trust and aligning policies, this Labour government can undo some of the devastating Brexit heritage from its Tory predecessors and pave the way for a future return at the least possible cost. To make this vision a reality, Labour must first overcome its Brexit timidity. The party's silence on the issue has allowed the narrative to be dominated by hardline Europhobes and right-wing populists like Nigel Farage. But now, senior politicians from other parties are rallying support for rejoining. Tory Dominic Grieve, the Green Party's Caroline Lucas, and, as covered in a recent video, a group of Labour backbenchers and junior ministers headed up by Stella Creasy. Business groups, trade unions and cultural organisations are also speaking out about the benefits of undoing Brexit. Labour should be leading this conversation, not ignoring it. By framing rejoining as a matter of national interest rather than ideological loyalty, the party could see its popularity return and lots of Labour deserters might reconsider. It's painfully obvious to most voters that Britain's future lies in Europe. It's time to end the Brexit experiment and return to the table where decisions are made. With democracy globally in retreat, and in a world being shaped by Napoleon Bona-spur's isolation, Putin's aggression, and the rising tide of autocratic, hostile states across the globe, rejoining the EU is not just a choice, it's a necessity. The question is not if, but when. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and please leave a comment down below and share this video on your social media.